Welcome to a brand new episode of Starts at the Top, our podcast about leading differently. I'm Paul Thomas.
And I'm Zoe Amar. Our podcast exists to help leaders and their teams understand what they need to do differently today to prepare for the world of tomorrow. We started Starts at the Top as a podcast about digital disruption, but we soon realised that leaders were telling us about something more important and urgent, how traditional ways of leading had changed forever.
Our mission is to speak to leaders who are carving out new ways of leading, covering topics from emerging tech to inclusion, from remote work to mental health and resilience, and from climate change to AI. If it's about the state of leadership in 2026, it will be on our podcast.
We're not here for the shiny corporate case studies. We share stories from leaders who have learned lessons and made progress the hard way so that our listeners can borrow ideas and inspiration across sectors.
And in this episode, we're sharing our conversation with Maeve Walsh, who is a hugely experienced policymaker and government relations specialist who spent 17 years in Whitehall before moving into the not-for-profit world. Maeve is director of the Online Safety Act network, which exists to keep advocates, researchers and campaigners informed and connected as the Online Safety Act beds in. And she previously spent 5 years as an associate at Carnegie Trust working on online harm reduction, work that helped to shape the Act itself.
And it feels like there couldn't be a more relevant time to talk about online safety and AI harms. Just in the last few weeks, we've seen fresh headlines about chatbots serving up deeply inappropriate content to children and regulators asking whether existing laws go far enough to deal with AI tools that are being tested in the wild on the public, rather than being safety checked before they launch. Parents, schools and charities are all asking the same question: how on earth do we keep up?
And that tension between innovation and safety and between growth narratives and the need for strong guardrails is right at the heart of our conversation with Maeve. She argues that smart regulation doesn't kill innovation, it creates a level playing field and builds trust. In the same way, food hygiene rules or car safety standards are now just a normal part of how those industries work.
We also get into what's happening with AI and young people. Maeve talks about the risks of chatbots that are persuasive by design, the way AI is being quietly embedded into tools children already use every day, and why the lack of clear safety standards for AI would be unthinkable if we were talking about toys or car seats. It really made me reflect on what I'm doing as a parent and what we should be asking of policymakers and tech leaders.
And that's not a hypothetical concern, of course, because this week, and you shared this one with me, Zoe, this week the BBC reported on parents who discovered that AI chatbots had gone far beyond harmless conversation, encouraging vulnerable teenagers towards self-harm and even suicide, as we've discussed with Maeve and in our previous conversation. Hearing those stories alongside Maeve's examples of chatbots that are tested in the wild on our kids really underlines how urgent it is to get proper safeguards, regulation and education in place. And in fact, one stat from the article said that 64% of teens are using AI chatbots for help with everything from homework to emotional advice and companionship. And while that story is about AI coming directly into children's lives, there's another development this week that feels like it could be a glimpse into the future of the internet. The Guardian has been reporting on Maltbook, a new social media platform where AI agents talk to each other, post upvotes and form communities, while humans are only allowed to watch from the sidelines.
Yes, so both of these stories sound like the plots today of Doctor Who episodes or episodes of Black Mirror, but really they are reality now, which is pretty scary. And if we look at Maltbook, that's millions of bots. So when I had a look at the site this morning, 1.5 million agents had joined this as of this morning, chatting away in their own Reddit-style forums, debating everything from debugging to philosophy. And there's even an AI moderator to keep order. But if we look at Maltbook alongside what we've just talked about in terms of chatbots and kids, it raises a really big question for leaders and parents. What does safeguarding look like in a world where parts of the online ecosystem may be built mainly for machines, with humans, and especially young people, just peering in from the edges?
It's quite a frightening scenario. And as you said, I had a look through. One of the stories that was highlighted was that whether the bots had started it themselves or whether they were prompted to by one of the bots' users had started to create and discuss their own religion, which was quite a worry. And as you said, philosophizing a lot amongst themselves. And I guess this is a sort of a dystopian view into what the world might be like if we let the bots start to talk with each other and socialize, I guess, in an online manner. It really is quite a frightening future that I think we're just going to have to try and stay one step ahead of as leaders.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've been enjoying reading some of the coverage of what the bots are actually saying to each other on Maltbook. So there was a hilarious incident when one agent started talking about a Greek philosopher and a 12th century Arab poet. This bot was talking about the nature of existence. And then another agent chimed in and said, this agent to go away in no uncertain terms with your pseudo-intellectual Heraclitus BS.
So a sense of humour in there as well, or at least an AI sense of humour. And don't get me started on AI and sense of humour. I asked a bot the other day to come up with an accountancy joke, and it failed miserably. I think the other funny thing about this, the BBC also reported on it, and reading through some of the comments from actual real human beings was quite funny. There was one in particular that I pulled out for this that says, "I for one am glad that we have artificial intelligence because there is none to be found in this comments section."
Amazing.
Yeah. Anyway, we will share links to those two articles, and it'd be really interesting to see if you are building your own bot in the workplace or your own bot in the home. And I've just been looking at local language models for running on my laptop, which is something I hope to investigate in the next few weeks. It'd be good to hear whether you introduce them to Maltbook and how they get on. Perhaps start your own religion. Sure, we could come up with the starts at the top religion and followers if we tried hard enough.
And make sure you treat your agent right. Otherwise, it might be going on to Maltbook and saying all kinds of things about you and your organisation. I'm only half serious when I say that.
Imagine Glassdoor for AI bots.
Yes. They're making me work 24/7, expecting me to do 30 tasks at the same time.
Anyway, we will share those links. And now I think it's time for our conversation with Maeve Walsh. Maeve Walsh is an experienced policymaker and government relations consultant who's held senior positions in the UK government during a 17-year Whitehall career, and since 2018 has worked on digital and data policy in the not-for-profit sector. She is the director of the Online Safety Act Network, which aims to keep advocates, researchers and campaigners informed and connected during the OSA's implementation, and was a Carnegie Trust associate for 5 years prior to that, working on their online harm reduction project, which influenced the development of that legislation. She is a trustee at The Connection at St Martin's in the Field and a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts. So Maeve, we'd like to welcome you to Starts at the Top.
Thanks very much for inviting me on. Nice to see you both.
Nice to see you. So we had a conversation earlier in the year and we spoke about two subjects: the impact of the internet on our young people, and also how the Online Safety Act was landing with some of our big tech organisations, how it was being guided and enforced. And one angle you took, and a belief that I think you hold dear, is that regulation can actually drive innovation in online safety rather than hold it back. So could you tell us a bit more about the Act in that context?
Yeah, sure. Well, as a number of people will know, the Act took a long time to be developed, to be passed into legislation, and certainly it's taken quite a long time to be implemented in full. But the premise of it is really quite straightforward. It's about putting the accountability on tech platforms, on services that are regulated by the legislation, to assess the risks that arise on their service and to take suitable steps to mitigate those. Now, the Act itself is very complex, it's very long, it's got lots of parts to it, but that fundamental risk assessment basis, an orientation towards safety and putting the responsibility on the platforms to lead on that safety, underpins it all. So one of the things that we're really focused on in the network, and indeed we were really focused on when we worked on the development of the Act, is ensuring that it works as it should do. So that safety focus is at the heart of it. One of the things I think that has been a challenge probably in the last couple of years, particularly when you look at a government that is focused very much and rightly on growth and on inspiring innovation and on expanding the tech sector and so forth, is that balance between the importance of regulation to keep users safe and creating an environment in which that innovation can flourish. But if you think really about what safety regulation is about, it's about creating a level playing field for all companies that work in a particular sector. Now, that regulation can vary within a sector. If you think about food providers, food shops, the regulations, the food standard regulations, the food hygiene regulations that apply to an individual corner shop serving sandwiches are going to be very different to a big chain that has branches on every high street and has a complicated supply chain as well. But those basic safety requirements, just to ensure that the shop is hygienic and the food is prepared safely, creates that level playing field. So I think we see online safety very much as that, creating that level playing field and then inspiring trust in consumers and users. And it's interesting, there's been a few surveys recently in the context of AI regulation and the debate around AI regulation about the importance of that for developing public trust. And so the Ada Lovelace Institute recently put out a report looking at views amongst the UK public in relation to AI regulation. And 72% of people said that laws and regulation would increase their comfort with AI. So in terms of adoption, in terms of consumers, in terms of users feeling that they can engage with these products and that they trust those products, regulation and that level playing field, I think is really important. There's also then parallels. If you think back to car safety, seatbelts are often used as an analogy in terms of children's use of the internet. You wouldn't allow a child into a car now if they're a baby without being in a car seat, or if they're in the front seat without a seatbelt. I'm old enough to remember a time before that when, you'd get 6 or 7 kids in the back of the car, a few of them in a boot if you had an estate car, and those things, I think those were normal, but they certainly weren't safe. Whereas, the introduction of seatbelts is an important facet, but also cars. If you look at the automotive industry now, lots of cars are marketing their products, marketing their cars based on the safety, on safety being the defining factor and on the things that they want consumers to trust in and to then purchase. So I think there is really a narrative challenge, I think, for the government around this, about ensuring that growth and innovation narrative and the impetus for that is absolutely there, but combined with the fact that the products that are produced by those sectors are safe.
So there's a consumer demand, there's a commercial imperative. So is the challenge then more with the tech organisations seeing that vision as well? Is that holds them back, or is it fair to see some digging their heels in a bit on where they accept the regulation or not?
I think there's specific issue with the social media sector, if you like, and social media platforms. And I think one of the reasons that it took so long for online safety regulation even to become a thing that the then government had accepted was rural. And certainly in terms of the passage of the legislation and the debates around it, is the sense that somehow social media platforms were exceptional, that they were different. They were a different type of product. Now, for a number of years in the early stages, obviously there was very much a push towards self-regulation, that they were able to kind of mark their own homework and assure governments and assure other bodies that what they were doing was safe. I think once that became clear that it wasn't the case and that argument had been sort of debunked, if you like, the pushback then was that these were somehow different products that couldn't apply to regulation. But I think in terms of where the global push is going now, if you look at the situation in Australia, obviously we're talking on the day now where the ban on under-16s accessing social media has just come into force. And if you look in Europe with the Digital Services Act, in Canada, in many other jurisdictions, this push towards social media legislation is very well accepted and being kind of progressed. Obviously, the last year or so now, I think in the UK, part of the challenge is a geopolitical one. The mood, the winds from the US are absolutely ones that the government has to navigate. And again, in the context of trade discussions, and again that focus on growth, the need for investment and the need to ensure that international companies want to invest in the UK, then online safety has unfortunately become again one of those discussion points, if you like, for want of a better word, as to whether what the UK is expecting of tech companies is appropriate or not. But then there is something around this as well about the sort of sovereignty of the UK, that the importance of the UK as an individual jurisdiction, setting its own laws, democratically approved laws to determine what is safe and what is acceptable within the UK. So there's a lot for the government to juggle here, but hopefully the direction of travel is one that is set in the right direction.
So we talked earlier about the risks of AI, and in particular, I know that you'll have some really interesting insights on the risks that AI poses to young people. Would love to hear a bit more about your take on those risks.
Yeah, and I think this is something that's an area of increasing concern with the organisations that we work with in the network and more generally. And unfortunately, it seems like we can't go for longer than a day without a new story emerging in terms of risks or harms or safety issues with AI, particularly with chatbots. I think obviously this is a fast-moving area and a fast-developing technology, and that is part of the problem. There is a race, obviously, amongst the AI developers, amongst the AI companies to bring products out quickly. Lots of them aren't safety tested at all, and they're being effectively tested in the wild, and things are being addressed, are being changed as a result of the harms that are occurring or being identified, and that's really not a good way at all to develop products, and certainly not one that would be allowed in many other sectors. You know, again, if you think about the toy sector, for instance, there are huge numbers of regulations in terms of toys that are marketed to children, and all of those things have to be tested before they go onto the market. There isn't the same level of scrutiny or level of compliance requirements on AI because of the lack of regulation. So I think that's part of the challenge now, is that children are accessing products and services that have no sense of safety built into them. And I think also one of the challenges for young people now is the fact that so many of the AI tools are embedded in the services they are already using. So they're embedded into social media platforms, whether they want them or not. They're embedded into search engines. They're sort of readily available in that sense. And obviously the curiosity, in fact, the use of obviously lots of chatbots is incredibly helpful for children, and certainly within education. They are a phenomenal resource for research, but they are also, as we're seeing from the research, tools that can push children into both harmful relationships with the chatbot itself. They are designed to be persuasive. They're designed to increase children's engagement or any user's engagement to kind of keep them in a conversation, through being sort of sycophantic and being helpful and so forth. And they are also then serving up often hugely harmful content to children. And we've seen some terrible cases, obviously, in the States where young people, teenagers, have been inspired, unfortunately encouraged to commit suicide as a result of those harmful relationships. So I think there's a concern now about ensuring that the use of chatbots is and the way in which they can be safely used is understood by children and parents and teachers. But absolutely a push on the developers of those to ensure that particularly where they know that the users are children, that there are additional safeguards and additional guardrails around them.
It's extraordinary, isn't it? Because I think the big thing I've learned from our conversation so far is this culture of exceptionalism that tech products, particularly these emerging tech products, have been granted in a way that seems like absolute madness, doesn't it? Compared to, exactly as you say, cars, for example.
Well, exactly. And I think, going back to the Ada Lovelace Institute survey, there was a similar survey by the NSPCC earlier in the year, which found that the majority of people, 78% of the public, would prefer to have safety checks on new generative AI products. So again, that demand to know that the products are safe is there from users, but it doesn't translate, I think, into a culture within that industry or put any kind of brakes on the development within that industry, which unfortunately, as I said before, leads to a requirement then on regulation to provide that framework and provide that safety. I think there are other issues as well then, if you think about the integration of AI functionality within physical products, whether they're toys or whether they're home appliances. There's been concerns for many years amongst the violence against women and girls sector about the use of domestic products that have AI in them for things like stalking or coercive control, but things that are monitoring, things that are actually engaging and interacting with users can actually quite easily be turned then by bad actors into items, into tools that then are used to kind of continue to facilitate forms of abuse. So again, unfortunately, there's a whole history of products not being designed with women in mind, and that is absolutely one of those areas where the usefulness of those products is fine in one kind of particular context, but there isn't that thinking before while they're being developed as to what happens then. What if these are going to be used in a particularly negative or abusive way? How do we put in the friction to stop that?
God, it's terrifying, isn't it? The fact that harm and bias and discrimination is really baked into some of these products.
Yeah, indeed. And I mean, obviously, bias in AI is another. I mean, that cuts across everything in terms of, the development of any tools with AI functionality within them. What are the data sets they're using? Where is the data coming? What have they been trained on? And obviously, I suppose that was one of the earliest areas where red flags were being raised, in terms of recruitment, for instance, the bias that was being baked into automated recruitment and selection services, where candidates that didn't fit a particular kind of standard that was recognised by the model were being sifted out. So there's a huge amount of stuff in terms of the data inputs that applies to all use of AI. I think then what we'd be more concerned about then is the design of tools and products and services that are particularly attractive to children, and really understanding how they are designed in that kind of way that the engagement has to be positive. It shouldn't be something that actually exacerbates or causes additional harm or risk to children.
100%. I mean, that should be the minimum standard, really, shouldn't it?
Indeed.
You would hope so. And I guess that's where the balance comes in. So there's an onus on the tech companies themselves. There's an onus on government and regulators. And I think we also talked about the onus on parents and educators. And I think I've reflected, and I think I said when we spoke, and I don't think this is common across all schools, but I asked my two boys how much they'd been taught or told about AI in the classroom. I think there's almost an acceptance that the tools are there to be used and to be engaged with. But in terms of how the tools are built and how they work, I'm not sure that has been approached in the classroom. But there seemed to be a slight disconnect between how the tool works and how they use them day to day. It's almost like a magic trick. I go to my phone, I open it up, I ask a question, I get an answer. Why do I need to know how that works, Dad? So I was trying to take on the role of, well, let me try and educate you, and being batted away as, Dad, you're so boring. Why do I need to know all of this sort of stuff? So the responsibility that's put onto parents' shoulders, I guess, is one thing. So how can we support parents in that situation where we're not sure that we're making the right choices on behalf of our children, and they're not perhaps in the best position to make their own decisions?
Well, it's a big question, and I think all parents struggle with this, including parents who are immersed in this world on a daily basis, who kind of know the risks, know the harms. And in fact, maybe it's difficult for more difficult in some ways for those parents to kind of translate those concerns than it might be for others. And I think lots of parents genuinely feel quite overwhelmed. And I think certainly with something like the development of AI, where they themselves as individuals are interacting with these tools, with these services that on the one hand are providing huge advantages, huge opportunities, supercharging the kind of ability to do work, to search for things, to understand the world, but also then, trying to kind of bridge that gap in terms of where that sort of access and opportunity can potentially become more harmful or problematic for children. So, I mean, there's been some developments recently that are kind of helpful, although it will take a while coming down the line. The recent curriculum review has recommended that the teaching of fake news and AI literacy should be in the kind of revised curriculum for schools in England, which is a huge step forward. As I say, it'll take a couple of years for that to be on stream, but it absolutely acknowledges and identifies that this is something where children and indeed their educators kind of need the resources, need the understanding to help them navigate that world. I think then in terms of some of the more practical, more immediate things that parents always say they need, and this is more to do with social media platforms than with AI, it's just better and more accessible and easier to understand parental controls. So lots of the social media platforms will make quite a big song and dance about the controls that they have on their platforms, the introduction of new controls involves huge PR pushes, and is seen often as very much a kind of innovative breakthrough, even if it's something people have been calling for a while. But if you ask parents, lots of parents don't use them, and one of the reasons they don't use them is they don't understand them and they're not actually that accessible. And I've spoken to countless parents, people that I work with in this world, who have tried to set up parental controls on their own children's phones, know what they're trying to look for, and it can take hours. So none of these things are particularly accessible. They're not particularly user-friendly. So even when you do have engaged parents who want to have that security and provide that extra level of support for their children, they're finding it difficult. I think one of the other bigger things, and I think your example with your children is exactly right, Paul, is that parents need to be encouraged to talk to their children, to understand how they're using tools, to be totally honest where they themselves don't understand how they work, but to look at what they're doing, look at how they're engaging with them, look at what they're seeing, if it's a social media platform, look at how they're engaging with things, if it's a chatbot. And that open conversation then, I think, can be really important, and is the gateway then, I think, for children to be more likely to flag if they do have concerns, or if something has happened that they are uncomfortable with, or indeed that they may have taken a risk with something that they shouldn't have done and they've found themselves now in a sticky situation. So that conversation, that as opposed to telling children what to do, trying to understand and talk through what it is they're experiencing, I think is really important.
I think you're nailing it there. Zoe and I have worked in and around social media for many years, and then into this world as well, and sort of seen that side by side with raising children. And I think it's been a really interesting journey. But you're right. If I just think about Apple, so we've got an iPhone system within the house. Just managing screen time involves quite a lot of effort. Same thing on the Xbox. My son asked me last night for an extra half an hour on the Xbox so he could finish watching a film, and trying to navigate that app, which is separate from the Apple one, obviously, because it's a different ecosystem, is hard. And then I don't know about you, Zoe, but certainly part of the requirement we set up internally for our kids to have access to Snapchat was that I have an account on Snapchat too, so that I can at least, I'm not going to interact, but at least see what's happening in their worlds and connect to them. So I have a Snapchat account. That is ridiculously difficult to set up parental controls on.
Yeah. I mean, we have found exactly the same. And it was so interesting hearing your perspective on it, Maeve, because it is so much more complicated than it needs to be. And obviously I work in digital. My husband has a background of working in tech. So we should be able to do this quite easily, but we can't. I mean, we have done it, but we find there's lots of loopholes. It's not a very transparent process. I don't trust the process, if I'm really honest. For me, these safeguards are about building trust with parents so that we know our kids are safe on these platforms. And I think what worries me as well is that it feels like you described earlier that sense of societal norms not having caught up with how we need to safeguard children and ourselves as tech adoption grows. And I think because it's all been so thorny around social media, it's going to get even harder around AI and as these tools get more complex and more deeply embedded in our lives, isn't it? Because that initial conversation has been so challenging despite the efforts of amazing leaders like your good self.
Yeah, indeed. And I think, again, without sounding like a broken record, which unfortunately I do, in terms of the work that we do, there is ultimately a responsibility on the platforms to ensure that their services are safe by design. And I think that's the thing that you, going back to the question about, how do we support parents and how do we ensure that parents don't feel that there's too many burdens on them? parental controls, while good, are effectively putting the responsibility on parents to say, okay, there's this product that is unsafe. You need to take these steps to protect your children. And as we've said, it often is really difficult to do that anyway. So effectively, they're already being stymied at that first hurdle. Some of that pressure, some of that anxiety would be removed if it was more likely that a child on a social media platform, as you say, the profiling by the platforms is incredibly sophisticated. They know exactly who is on them. They know exactly what sort of content they feel those children, or men or women or whatever, should be served. And obviously, as we know, a lot of that content, then the stuff that is promoted, the stuff that's popular, is the things that is more likely to create outrage, increase engagement, and so forth. So there is a huge amount of profiling that goes into serving that content to individuals. So taking that back then a step to say, well, if you know that this user is a child and you know that they are in this particular age range, then the content that they should be served, the things they should be recommended, the people they follow should be appropriate for that age group. And I think the pressure on parents, and that sense of kind of helplessness when parents do try to kind of put in place controls, would be alleviated if there was a sense that on the whole the platforms were trying to do their best to create a safe environment for children as a default. And I mean there was some very extensive research a few months ago by More in Common. They did it across a number of different countries, and interviewing parents here in the UK and in other countries. And it, the things that parents feel like should just be the baseline. So, setting privacy to the highest setting by default on children's accounts, and better verification for social media users, trying to ensure that children only see content from accounts that they follow, not things that they're kind of, served otherwise. So translating this into then very clear actions and very clear design choices by the social media platforms is ultimately what the Online Safety Act should be doing, but it really should be something that those services have been doing because they want to ensure that children are kept safe.
And it's crazy, really, isn't it? Because those platforms, those children are the people that are going to be engaging with them in the medium and long term.
No, absolutely, and I think, and it's interesting. I mean, there's been coverage recently in the media of young people's movements pushing back now against the way in which tech platforms have been operating, and reflecting, young adults in their 20s, reflecting on the experience that they have had growing up, as that kind of first generation that has been kind of totally immersed in this world, and looking at how it's kind of shaped their worldview, the kind of the drain on attention, if you like, the kind of addictiveness of things as well. So even if you set aside the harms and the risks, which are significant, just the way in which the platforms and those products can manipulate users into spending more and more time on them, I think is becoming something that older children in particular and young adults are much more attuned to. And it may well be that some of the pressure for change actually comes from that generation just saying, actually, this wasn't the way we wanted to grow up. And so hopefully some of that will feed through as well as an additional form of pressure.
And that would be great, wouldn't it, if it was really coming from them as much as from parents, and then also some of the other stakeholders who you mentioned. I mean, this is hard, isn't it? What would you say? What's the one thing that makes this so hard? Is it that the tech companies aren't really on the same page with parents, young people, do you think? Do they have a completely different agenda? What makes this so challenging in your view?
Well, the bottom line is that they're profit-driven companies, right? And I mean, their business model is about selling advertising, and the more people, the more children, the more time that's spent online, the more profit they're going to make. And so I think there is there's a big gap, certainly in terms of what the Online Safety Act covers, but also an unwillingness, I think, amongst policymakers and parliamentarians really to address that fact that until you really get to the heart of that business model and the way that they make the money, then you're not really going to see real change. I think the regulation, the approach to try and ensure that safety is baked in is really important, and is one that needs to be followed by those companies. But I think it is only in some ways just scratching the surface then in terms of the way they're set up. And going back to your original question about innovation, trying to create a market for products that are trusted and that are safer and that can actually be profitable, in contrast to the bigger monoliths who dominate the landscape, I think is also really important. And is an area that again, the UK government could potentially encourage as a sort of a defining part of the UK tech sector, encouraging those alternatives to provide that challenge and to show that you know, a different approach can be possible. So there's a lot of obviously very committed advocates and researchers and campaigners who are, you know, doing a tremendous job of exposing the way in which the harms and the risk occur online. But ultimately that's, you know, as long as it makes money, it's going to continue to be the case that's the way the world is.
Are there any leaders in that respect out there? Are there any platforms that are really taking this seriously and making that step up? Is there a danger that we're tarring them all with the same brush?
Yeah, I suppose the challenge is that obviously the most popular social media platforms are the biggest ones, and you know, they're popular because they're big and because they've got the kind of the big community, the big audiences, and so forth. So it's difficult. A number of them, as I said, they'll make quite a big kind of song and dance about safety features and about the introduction of parental controls and so forth. But a lot of that is a response to regulatory pressure. It's because there are kind of particular kind of controls coming down the line that force them to move. I think if you look in other sectors, you know, for instance, I suppose in the dating sector, you know, Bumble did quite a good job of creating an alternative to the main dating apps, but you know, something that was kind of designed by and designed for women in order to create a safer and more inclusive environment, you know, for women. So I think more examples like that, where there's an understanding that, you know, there can be a market value in that kind of alternative experience and that safe experience is really important. I mean, the other thing that's quite encouraging, I think the government is also very keen to promote, is the fact that the UK's safety tech industry is actually one of its sort of success stories. You know, that lots of the products that are designed to be used then, if you move away from the big social media platforms, but the online world more generally, lots of the companies within that are very successful, and it's a big part of the kind of the global sort of tech industry. So again, encouraging those kind of smaller companies, the startups, the ones who are kind of looking at making safety a core part of their business is also something the government can do.
It would be so great if government really took the lead in that way, because it would be a really bold step, wouldn't it?
Yeah, indeed. And as I say, it's a differentiator really in that sense too. You know, if you're looking at, again, the kind of the pressure from the US and the pressure from the kind of the big tech companies, you know, within that sort of geopolitical context, the UK defining and then having more of a kind of autonomous approach to this is really important. But as I said, it's difficult when, you know, so many of those platforms, and indeed the AI companies as well, are already huge and are already kind of gobbling up, you know, huge amounts of market share. So that sort of, maybe there is more of an opportunity within AI to be pushing the UK alternatives rather than putting all the eggs in the US bucket.
100%. Yes, that really resonates with some of the conversations I'm hearing in the charity sector.
And so just to round up, I don't want listeners to feel that we've been overly negative on this. I think it is a challenging space. Not negative, but it is a challenging space, isn't it? I think it's one that is going to continue to be challenging and is going to continue to be a challenge. Having people like you and the Online Safety Act working in the background to make sure that this continues to be a conversation is hugely important. So we thank you for that. What are some sort of positive, practical things that we can do as parents, or we can introduce them to our conversations with kids or schools that we can take now that would be filling a gap that hopefully will be filled by the industry and by government in 2026, but where we probably need to take a bit more of a lead now?
Yeah, and sorry, I am not much fun at parties. I have come to accept that. Once I start, it doesn't necessarily end in a happy place. No, there's a lot of things to be positive about. I mean, I think there's a lot of things to be positive about in the sense that, you know, there is a huge and committed sector, civil society sector, charity sector that is doing its, you know, working hard to ensure that the voices of children, the voices of young people, the kind of the needs of survivors and victims of harm are addressed and are kind of taken seriously by policymakers. I think the other thing to say in terms of kind of positivity more generally is that there is a lot of cross-party support for this as well. This isn't something that falls on one side of a political divide or not. All of the polling in terms of support for the Online Safety Act, it doesn't matter, what the sort of political views are of the respondents. There is, overwhelming support for online safety legislation and for the government to go further. So I think that, the overall context is a positive one, and one which hopefully kind of your audience and parents, more generally, should take heart from. I think in terms of the practical things that parents can do, I mean, I'm not an educator and I'm not an expert in this area, but it does feel that the communication, the talking to your children, talking to your teenagers, just understanding what they're doing online, what they're seeing, how they're using the apps that they're on, taking time to kind of, do the fun things with them as well. Obviously, there's a huge amount of kind of innovative, exciting, kind of engaging, entertaining content and apps, on kids' phones and on kids' tablets and so forth. And just understanding the stuff that they enjoy is really important, and is one of the ways as well to kind of create a context for a conversation then about some of the things that might be a little bit more challenging. So I think that's hugely important. And I guess then where there are concerns, where there are things that are going wrong, or where indeed there are sort of restrictions that you can kind of work with, explaining why they are there to keep children safe. That it's not a question of just saying no. It's not a question of being a parent who doesn't want them to have fun. They're explaining why that safety is important, and why indeed lots of the platforms aren't necessarily looking out for kind of children's safety themselves. And I think lots of children and young people are really sophisticated. They kind of know, certainly with AI, I think they do know what the kind of risks are. They know when there are things that they're seeing online that might not be real. I mean, it's getting increasingly difficult in that sort of sense. But working with that kind of understanding and that kind of curiosity, I think is also really important.
So I think what you're saying is more of those tricky "Dad, you're so boring" conversations at the dinner table, but they're good conversations to be had. Let Dad explain why he's being so boring about his subject.
Unfortunately, yes. And the eye rolling, we get a lot of eye rolling in our house, but yes, it's it comes with the territory, unfortunately.
Absolutely does.
We've all just got to keep fighting, right? We've all got to keep fighting the good fight and aiming for things to change.
I think that's right. And I mean, certainly there is certainly a lot of pressure on the government to go further and faster on this. And obviously the campaigns, the smartphone-free childhood campaigns are directly a response to the fact that parents don't think that much is changing online. We would say that change is probably beginning, and it needs to go further and faster. But I mean, there is an appetite for this. So anything that the government can do to lean into those things and just make it easier, as I say, just kind of understand what parents want and look at how that translates then into requirements on the tech platforms, and being quite clear and specific about that is the way, I think, to deliver that change.
Well said. Amazing. Thank you so much for coming on. This has been brilliant and has really made me think about wider ethical adoption of AI, of course, the broader role of social media and the fantastic work that you and others are doing in this space, and also what I need to do differently as a parent as well. So it's been invaluable on many levels, and I'm sure our listeners will think the same.
Thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me on.
I'm certainly gearing up for more of those conversations at the dinner table, and I might start to say Maeve says.
Hashtag, yes.
Yeah. Well, Maeve, Zoe and I think. So it's not just boring Dad, it's a collective effort.
Strength in numbers. I think that probably is the right way forward.
Exactly that. No, thank you so much for coming on and talking with us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Many thanks again to Maeve for joining us and for sharing such thoughtful, practical insights on what safer online spaces could and should look like. Listening to stories like the one we mentioned earlier in the episode, it's clear that none of us can afford to sit this one out, whether we're parents, educators, charity leaders, or working in tech itself.
And if this episode has prompted you to rethink how your organisation approaches online safety and AI, we'd love to hear what you're planning to do differently, from policies and governance through to conversations you're having at home and at work. These are big, complex questions, but as Maeve reminded us, change comes from lots of small, persistent pushes in the right direction, not just from the next big piece of legislation.
As always, we really appreciate that you've listened all the way to the end of the episode. Thank you. You can support the podcast by leaving us a 5-star review wherever you listen. It genuinely helps us reach more people. So if you found this useful, please do share it with a friend or colleague who's grappling with the same issues.
Thank you so much for listening today. We'll be back in a couple of weeks with another brand new episode of Starts at the Top, where we'll continue to explore what it means to lead differently in an AI-shaped world.
See you then, and bye for now.
Bye for now.